Okay, I am ready to open the room up because we have a few minutes. We'll let everyone come and say hi, and then we'll get rolling.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, Rabbi.
All right, thanks.
Hi, Eric. Hi, Lana. Hi, everyone.
Good evening.
Hi. Hi, Eric.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Hi.
I assume you're going to sign books so as soon
Yeah.
as we can get in person, right?
Book plates will be available by the coffee. Yeah.
Yeah, if you can hand them to me through the screen, I'll.
No, I'll wait till we get together. That's
Yeah.
Good evening,
Yeah.
Rabbi. It's good to see you.
Hello, how are you? Nice to see you.
Hi, Eileen.
Hi, Vivian.
Hi, Lisa. Hi, Viv.
Hi,
Oh,
Vivian.
the gang's all here. I opened the room a little early because I saw the waiting room was filling up. So who here has already read the book? I just want to get a little peek around. I think Elisa, Eric. Okay, a couple folks. Okay, cool. I'll be counting on you guys for some juicy Q&A then.
Yeah. Again, it was when we first knew that Rabbi Graubart was giving this class. So again, it's not all that fresh in my mind, but I'll do the best I can.
I'll try not to ruin it. Yeah. So it's.
Did anyone go to the Del Mar Fairgrounds this weekend for the concert the Jewish Federation put on for Israel?
No, we passed it in the car, and there was a group of young girls, out there with big Israeli flags, and it said Israel Fest.
Nice.
I didn't know anything about it. I don't know if they advertised it and sent it to the community, but I didn't know about it.
We had included it in some e-blasts as well, but I noticed I didn't see a lot of my friends posting about it online or anything. I don't know how many families ended up going. I saw a couple of my friends go, but I didn't see a big crowd. All right, party people, it is 7 o'clock on the dot. I'm going to go through and just mute the room really quick so that way we don't have any background noise, but we will be able to unmute to participate shortly. And actually, I will go on mute myself and throw it over to Rabbi Graubart. As people are still entering the room, we'll be sure to welcome them, and they can also contribute to Q&A and all that good stuff. All right, thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much for having me, for doing this for the book for me. It's good to see everybody. I'm just going to try to get it there. I'm changing my view a little bit. I thought what I would do is just talk a little bit about why I wrote the book. It's this book, in case Women and God. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I was trying to get out of writing it, mostly, and then I'm going to read a section of it just to get us into it, and then I'll see if there's any questions. If there's not, I have more to read, more to say, and then after I do the second reading, maybe there's other questions. The trick is going to be that I'm aware that people haven't read it. There's a challenge because it's a suspense novel, so I don't want to give things away. So the stuff that I read, stuff I talk about, it would be sort of generic, maybe a little frustratingly generic, but I think that's all I can do, just to not ruin the many surprises that you may encounter when you read the book. All right, so kind of why I wrote it, or why I wrote this particular story. I'm bringing that up because people ask me that a lot. And the thing is that the best answer for this particular book or any of the novels that I've written is that I just had a story that popped into my head. And I don't know that I'd even go any deeper than that. I mean, once kind of the germ of the story popped into my head, it's sort of like a puzzle and you put it together. I will say it didn't pop into my head totally out of context. This was years ago. It takes a long time for me to write a book. And Rabbi working the first round of the Me Too scandals and Harvey Weinstein. And I don't even remember that well. I think the Al Franken scandal happened around that time, maybe shortly after Harvey Weinstein. And there were people comparing the two. And if you're me, you're a rabbi in a town, you notice that both of these guys are Jewish, and with whatever grief you can bring to that. But I started to think, okay, so the world now is awake to these kind of Me Too scandals. It's not that they're new, it's just that it's the first time the world is really waking up to them. And I thought, so what happens in the Jewish world? How would we respond? And so then because that's what I know. And I've known about many scandals in Jewish institutions in my career, and I've kind of seen how institutions respond, how individuals respond. So then the book kind of just came in. I also wanted to write another mystery, and I thought, okay, that can work too, because there's going to be a scandal, and then there'll be a murder. Maybe it'll be because of the scandal. And I thought it would be interesting to place it in a rabbinical school, because I thought. I'll get to that in a second, but I thought just pairing a rabbinical school with a mystery, with a sex scandal, invited all sorts of drama, which wouldn't go overboard. I mean, these things do happen they happen in universities, they happen in the entertainment world, they happen in rabbinical school, they happen in places where there is religious charisma, where there are men, it's usually men that assert a certain amount of religious charisma, often, not always, and this is a book of fiction, but sometimes, and we all know this, leads to sexual misconduct, sexual misbehavior. So I thought that would be a good context to place a drama that relied on a murder and a mystery, and it all. I mean, I have to say the story sort of fell into place over sort of walks I took and bike rides I took over a day or two. Then I think years to write, but I had the kernel and most of the surroundings of the story pretty early in the process. I wanted to examine. I've always been interested in this nexus between religious charismatic leaders and sex scandals, and we all know about this, and it's very famous in the Catholic Church. But it's not just the Catholic Church. Virtually every religion has this phenomena, and I mean it's famous in yoga, where you have yoga instructors that become sexual predators, or not necessarily even predators. And I'm not pointing to anybody in particular. These are just stories that I've heard over the years, we've had it in the Jewish world. And I know several people. I've known some personally. I've known certain scandals in the Jewish world, and I'm actually not going to mention any names right now. And my book is fiction. The characters are fictional. You may, if you've read it, see some resemblance to characters that maybe you recognize, and I don't mind talking about that. I'm not going to say it right now, but there have been some well-known characters in the Jewish world that very clearly engaged in sexual misconduct. They were religious charismatics, and unfortunately, it was often known during their lifetime, during times when they were very influential and powerful in the Jewish world. Those sexual misbehaviors were well known, but nobody really did very much about them. And then maybe after they died, or because of the Me Too movement, they came to light. And so that's just an interesting topic for me, and it's still an interesting topic for me. So I wanted to explore that a little bit. I'm also really interested in the concept of a spiritual mentor. I've had mentors in my life, spiritual mentors. Most rabbis have. I think most people have. And one thing I was just playing with, because this has happened to me, it's happened to others, it's fairly common, is what happens if you get disappointed with a mentor. A mentor brings a lot to you, and you're following those teachings, and you find something terrible about that person. What do you do, especially if you follow that person into a career, or you've based a lot of your life's wisdom on that person's wisdom. So what do you do? Say suddenly you find out terrible things they've done. Maybe you find out from them personally. Maybe you're involved in some way. So I wanted to explore that a little bit too. Just the sense of disappointment. How do you maintain a strong spiritual courage if the person that you most relied on suddenly lets you down? And I guess I'm also sort of interested in, this has to do, again, just my own reading, but also my career in the Jewish world. How do large institutions, and institutions are made up of human beings, and so in a book, the human beings become characters in the book. But so how do large institutions respond to sex scandals? And so scandals in general, but also sex scandals. And I'm interested in how. The answer very often is closing and just trying to keep things as quiet as possible and becoming as protective of the reputation of the institution as possible. And I found that before, I wrote the novel, and just kind of noticed these patterns. So wondering why that generally is with institutions, even institutions that we sort of identify as being ethical and wanting to be honest. So often those institutions also, clamp down. And just wanted to explore. I try very much, both in my life and also in the book, not necessarily to judge, but to have a sense of understanding. There is some judgment that's taking place in the book through all these things. But I find is that I'm just curious about these sources of force or power that come to the Jewish world, to the larger institutional world, and how do we respond and why? I guess the last thing I'll say, and this to me is, one of the reasons I read fiction, and I guess one of the reasons I write fiction is I'm curious how large social forces affect ordinary people. So you'll read the newspaper, and so you read all sorts of different Me Too scandals, and it's it becomes sort of out there, something that maybe you're reading about in blogs, or you're watching videos, or you're reading the newspaper, but it's happening to real people. And fiction is a way for a writer to explore how do these large social forces, like a war, like different kinds of scandals, any kind of like political battles, these large things which play out in the newspaper and the news, but they affect real people. And so a lot of what I try to do is hone in on characters and allow those characters to be victims of these large social forces, and almost like a science experiment, just kind of see what happens. How is this character going to respond? How is that character going to respond? Where's the anger going to come from? Where's the disappointment, the disillusionment? So that's also something I tried to do in the book. I guess the last thing I'll say is that my previous book was also a murder mystery. It was called Silwan. And the large social force I examined was the Israel-Palestinian conflict. And I had several characters that these were ordinary people, and how would they respond? I found in writing that book that when I focus more on how the characters are going to respond than to sort of sermonizing over the social force itself, which was the Israel-Palestinian conflict, if I could focus more on the characters, what would emerge, hopefully, what I would try to make emerge, would be a more nuanced discussion of the large social issues. So even though my point in this book isn't necessary to make judgments on the Me Too movement one way or another, I feel like in writing, at least for me, and then I hope for the reader, there's a possibility of a nuanced, thoughtful approach to the Me Too movement, and especially how it might affect Jews, Jewish leaders, and Jewish institutions. All right, so that's my little introduction. What I think I'm going to do now, again, I'm going to just read a little bit. Again, this was a little tricky because I'm reading something, I don't want to give anything away. So I find myself apologizing a lot when I do these readings because maybe it's not the most exciting parts of the book. I don't know, but I'm going to read from a chapter in the book that I actually liked enough that I published it as a short story, separate from the novel itself, with just a few changes. And I think it works as a short story. It would be a long short story, so I'm not going to read the whole thing. But so what happens in the book is there's a lot of the type of Jews that I know well. So Jews that went to camp, the Jews that go to rabbinical school, Jews that study Talmud. And so for people or Jews that have spent years in Israel, so a lot of people like me, Jews like me, camp is a very important experience. And I went to Camp Ramah, and I don't. This isn't giving too much away. There's a main character who is a spiritual charismatic, and he has a student much younger, a young woman who is a rabbi. She's a rabbi when the story begins, and she has all these memories of her life with this character. His name is Moshe. And she met him when she was a camper at a camp called Camp Tikva, which may be suspiciously like Camp Ramah. I'm willing to say that the Camp Ramah was kind of the model for that camp. So she meets him there. So I'm reading from the chapter that talks about when they first met and then how he became a very important influence on her. So at the time, he's quite a bit older than her. He's already, I think, in his 50s, and she's 13. So she's exactly 13. And both those ages are interesting and important ages for me as I was writing the book. So let's see. So I'm coming kind of in the middle of this story, this chapter, and so Moshe comes to camp. So he's a Camp Ramah, and he's not given anything to do. The director just sees something in him. Later, again, not giving anything away. Later, Moshe becomes very famous and a very important figure in the Jewish world. At this point, he's not. So it happens to him sort of fairly late in life. At this point, he's just a kind of storyteller and singer that's out there and trying to grab as many gigs as he can, and kind of a little bit in it for the money, but also in it because he's got spiritual talent. And the camp director sees something in him and just thinks that's somebody that maybe our kids would like, and maybe the kids can hang out with him, and I won't give him anything to do. And I can tell you that Camp Ramah would do that. Camp Ramah would bring people in. I mean, it happened to me. They would bring people in that they just thought would be a good influence on the kids and give them nothing to do. And they would go around like a scholar in residence, just go around and do whatever they want. If they were good at singing, they would just get some kids and sing. If they wanted to study Torah and teach, they would do that. They would hang out and play with the kids. So the character is just given that assignment, and this is all from his point of view. He's a little lazy. He's there because he gets the free food and he gets paid for it. But then he meets Yael. So Yael is the 13-year-old. And he sees something in her, and he decides to really do something with his time at the camp, because he's actually inspired by this very thoughtful 13-year-old girl. He sees her reading like William James and Kierkegaard, and that's not something. And she's always by herself, and so he notices that, and he decides, I could do something with her, and if it's with her, maybe there's some other kids like her. So I'll start here. I'm starting a little bit in the middle, but you'll get it. Moshe suspected that the brother camp director had also sensed the laziness that often infected Moshe's soul, and that's why he agreed to hire him. What harm could the old fat man do sitting on the porch playing guitar all day? He couldn't exactly mesmerize these wealthy children with his thoughts on how Binah mated with Chokhmah to produce Tiferet, to teach them to sit quietly and meditate on God's 39 true names, or explain how emanation, revelation, and creation were essentially the same thing, the same power as clothed in husks of separate colors. It wasn't kid stuff. That's all sort of Kabbalistic nonsense, really. But that's kind of where Moshe's at right now. He's thinking, am I really going to teach those kids that stuff? It was only when he saw Yael. He learned her name from Tzippi, reading one day from William James, the next day from Kierkegaard, and the following day, God help her, from Heschel himself, that he thought, I wonder if I could talk to her. I wonder if I could teach her something. I wonder if I could do something here. First, he instructed Tzippi to bring her to that evening's front porch concert. So Tzippi is like his assistant. Tzippi is, at the time, I think 17. So she's like his assistant at the camp. Later in the book, later in life, she becomes the chancellor of the Hebrew Theological Institute, which may sound somewhat similar to Jewish Theological Seminary, coincidentally, but it's a rabbinical school. So a lot of this is a flashback where the major characters are younger, much younger. So Tzippi at this point is only 17. During the bulk of the novel, She's late 30s, still very young to be chancellor. But anyway, first he instructed Tsippi to bring her to that evening's front porch concert. He would give concerts every night. Why? Tsippi immediately asked. He squinted at her through the thick lenses of his glasses. The 11 a.m. sun, just emerging from a cloud, produced a kind of halo over Tsippi's head, while the glare obscured the rest of her body. An angel, Moshe wondered. But the cloud moved slightly, and Moshe took in the red tank top, the blue shorts, the bare feet, the eyes so filled with scheming and petulance. A child, he thought, but then corrected himself. She's 17. Moshe's mother had gotten married at 18. And this Tsippi is Tzippola? He had to admit, she looked less like a child, more like her mother every day. He sighed, carefully thought, what was he doing here? Teenagers. They were a separate species. He knew nothing about them. Why Yael? Tsippi asked again. So beautiful. This stunning woman child, perfectly formed, legs, torso, toes, wrists, fingers in perfect aesthetic alignment, proof of the Holy One's beneficence and artistry. And she stood under God's bright sun, his emanating touch in this dazzling green Wisconsin paradise with rolling hills, blue lakes, butterflies and hummingbirds. God, 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 so beautiful. Of course, there were the 2 reddish blotches on her nose and the even bigger one taking up half of her lower chin, her stringy, unwashed hair. There was the smell of chlorine, inescapable even in the kitchen. The latrines, the less said the better. The odor of boys everywhere. The yammer and groaning of spoiled children. His aching back, re-injured every night by his ancient mattress. God, so wondrous. New Tzippola, she's not a child of God? Like you, like me? I don't have to do everything you tell me. Mom hired me to be your assistant. That doesn't mean you're my master. I'm not your slave. So, Nu, you do it as a friend. I ask you as a personal favor. Your Holy Mother pays you money. That means nothing to me. For me, you're my Tzippola, my good friend. She tilted her head, her squinted eyes, her slightly upturned lips. They communicated annoyance and affection at the same time. How does she do that, Moshe wondered. So beautiful. If only she'd wash her hair. I wish you wouldn't call me that, Moshe, she said. Tzippola? I'm not 7, Moshe. My name is Tzipora, and no one likes her. She's sort of creepy, reading by herself all the time. It's not a good idea. She'll keep people away. He stroked his beard. Clicks, he thought. It's not that he was unaware. They existed even among the yeshiva buchers in Yerushalayim. But those social rankings formed around Talmudic prowess, which meant Moshe was always at the top in a category all his own. These rich American kids, the hierarchies were more rigid and harder to follow than the Sephirotic chart. He could ask Yael himself, but that would probably scare her away. No, he said, you're right. My Tzippola. Sorry, Miss Tzipora. I'm not your master. I'll discuss this with your mother. I'll need a new assistant. But please know my love for you is the purest. It's undying. My sweet holy child. Okay, chill. I'll do it. I wasn't refusing. Just giving you advice. She's not, well, look at her. She's not normal. Moshe laughed, his belly laugh, his full body chuckle. It worked for some people. For Tzippi's mother, and sometimes also for Tzippi, she laughed along with him, though Moshe wasn't sure why. Normal, he said? Tzippola, does that seem like the criteria for what I'm doing here? You imagine I'm looking for normal? Point taken, she said. She turned away quickly and sprinted doe-like across the field. Artemis, Moshe thought, the huntress in pursuit of prey. Or better, our Holy Mother Rebecca, rushing forward because to live as God's prophetess is to rush, to move, to dart, to spring, to jump. So beautiful. All right, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit where Yael is now confiding in Moshe. So now that Yael is the 13-year-old, who later is really the star of the book, she's now 13. It wasn't so much the divorce, she told him. Divorce she could handle. Half the kids in her class visited parents on the weekends. Even the adultery. She supposed she could live with that. Her father had at least tried to explain. Her parents had fallen out of love with each other. It happened all the time. So he'd reached out in his pain and loneliness to his secretary. Okay, creepy, but really, who else was it going to be? She got it. She was mature. But the scandal, her father's picture in the paper, the crazy headline accusing him of consorting with mobsters. It wasn't fair, she thought. Her father wasn't a celebrity, just a rabbi. And now he was ruined and humiliated. It would never go away. She knew it. Of course it will go away, sweet child. Everything passes. They were in Moshe's cabin, at the table he used for eating, though he had nothing to offer. No cocoa, no cookies, just schnapps, but that wasn't for her. It was well past bedtime, but Moshe could explain to her counselor. Not this, Moshe. I can see it in my father's eyes. He's so embarrassed. His reputation means everything to him. It doesn't even matter if he gets another job. It's a stain on his heart. I'm dying for him. You die for him? Gewalt. Child, that's not the way. He dies for you. I know, and he would, but he's not strong, Moshe, not like you. He loves too deeply. That's what he told me. He chuckled. Ah, to love too deeply. I don't know. Nu, is this possible? But sweet one, maybe it's you. Maybe you love too deeply, or you don't have enough love for yourself. He looked at her, watched her study her fingernails, her eyes half shut, so focused, so tight. Was she thinking deeply about his cliches, his nonsense? Loving too deeply. What does that really mean? Tell me something, my angel. Why Kierkegaard? She smiled. You saw my books. Why do you think you're here? Nu, I get William James, Heschel certainly, but Kierkegaard? Christian mysticism? Existentialism? I'm not seeing the connection between this and your beloved father. I'm trying to pray. It's all I can think of. It's not just for him, it's for my mother. She's so filled with hatred. I can't talk to her about him, about anything really. And now we'll have to move. This is the thing, Moshe. I've got no control. I need to do something. I've prayed my whole life, but that was, well, bullshit. Sorry, it was nothing. It's just bat mitzvah stuff, memorizing. But the night before they made me come here, I saw my father in his office wrapped in a tallis, holding a siddur, swaying back and forth, and I've never seen him cry. But he was shaking. He was jerking around so much, the tears were literally flying off his face. It was the first time I ever thought that prayer could mean anything other than getting the words right. He was praying like he could change things. And you want to? Nu? You want to change things? I want to pray like it means something. But you know, precious child, everybody knows. What you want to change can't be changed by prayer. You pray for what? Nu? That your parents get back together? That you go back in time and stop them before they fall out of love? You've read Heschel too, Nu? In prayer, you enter the domain of the king. You feel the presence of the sacred queen. It's not a vending machine. You put in some money, it gives you a candy bar. I know. She grabbed a clump of tangled hair and looked ready to tear it out. For the fourth or fifth time in the conversation, she seemed on the verge of hysteria. What then would Moshe do? But each time she swallowed back her tears. Instead of crying, her greenish brown eyes, he'd never seen that color in eyes, not sure he'd never seen that color, beckoned, drew him in. I swear I'm not looking for that. I read your article on prayer in the Jewish handbook. I want what you want. I know God won't put my family back together. I'm not a child, not anymore. I want to believe someone's listening. I just want a presence, a voice. I swear that's all. Suddenly, a buzzing sound filled the cabin, steadily increasing in volume. Yael brought her fist to her mouth, gaping at Moshe. Angels, devils, mosquitoes, he said. Knew they're exactly on time, like alarm clocks, these dear friends. Except instead of calling me into God's beautiful world, they tell me it's time for bed. They only bite if I stay up too late talking to campers. That's the bargain I made. Moshe waited for her laugh, then shrugged. What did he know about how to make a 13-year-old girl laugh? But they'd connected, hadn't they? She'd read his article, his only non-academic publication, the only article he'd written that didn't attempt to unravel complicated Talmudic passages or compare different late medieval manuscripts. And he'd given her an idea. Maybe he could be useful in this place with these children, or at least with her. He thought about how to approach Brother Camp Director about his proposed project. But then a brainstorm hit him of astonishing ingenuity. He wouldn't ask permission. He'd use some of his free concert time, sneak a few moments during lunch, and rely on the campers' discretion for the midnight session. He asked Sippy to gather 10 campers with only one criteria. They should be spiritual. Spirituality was key. Mamish, spiritual. I don't know anyone who's spiritual. No one is spiritual. I don't know what the word means. No one does. I don't know what mamish means. Why do you always tell me things I don't understand? I don't want to work with you anymore. I don't like you. She smiled through the rant, looking at the sky. Despite what she'd said, Moshe could tell she was considering who to ask, but perhaps using a different calculus than he'd suggested. Knew it didn't matter. As long as one of the 10 was Yael. Sippy wrinkled her nose at that, but didn't protest. In the end, she chose 5 boys and 5 girls. Except for Yael, they were all 16, athletic, confident, extroverted, awful, obnoxious, and Moshe guessed popular. Though honestly, even when he became adored, massively adored years later, he never understood the concept. This was the plan. The group planted 2 rows of beans at a corner of the central field. They'd care for each row equally. Water, plant, food, weeding, chasing away insects, fencing out squirrels and rabbits, whatever it took. He put the largest, most muscular boy in charge of cultivation because the Moshe looked like a starker, a peasant. but they would only pray on behalf of row 1. He instructed them to direct their hearts to row Avram in the morning and afternoon davening and ignore row Itzik. And 3 nights a week, they would gather for chatzot, midnight prayers, where they would pour out their souls for Rav Avram and perhaps even throw in a curse at row Itzik. He put Yael in charge of prayer. She took to it like a demon. She composed hymns extolling God's loving mercy to beings, planted in honor of our holy and saintly father Abraham. She convinced Moshe to set her words to melody, and in a surprisingly lovely voice, she led her congregation in heart-wrenching midnight sing-alongs. She distributed talis and tefillin to everyone and demonstrated how to tie tefillin to those who'd only done it once on their bar bat mitzvah and forgotten. She carefully inspected the plants every morning, and when she spotted a few with suspicious-looking white spots, she adapted the traditional healing prayers and directed her campers to focus them on the sick individuals of Row Avram. When that didn't seem to work, when one of the plants appeared to die, the Moshe himself wouldn't have been able to distinguish life from death when it came to beans. She switched to Debbie Friedman's modern healing song, changing the line, bless those in need of healing, to bless those beans in Row Avram in need of healing. When that didn't work, when it became clear, even to farm illiterates like Moshe, that Row Itzik was thriving and Row Avram was dying, she instituted midnight tachanan services where everyone threw themselves on the earth, their faces in the dirt. Together as one sacred congregation, they implored the Holy One with all the breath in their lungs and all the blood in their veins, with full throats, as if their pleadings were the waters that fill the rivers and lakes, and their tears the holy salty substance that formed the seas. They implored the blessing one of mercy for healing, renewal, and growth, but only for Rav Avram. It didn't work. The campers emerged in the morning, dusty and dirty from aerobic prayer. Row Itzik sprouted deep green buds, and then the beginning of actual beans, round, hard, healthy. Row Avram, nothing, garnished. Some brown spots, leaves that vanished overnight, thin grassy stalks nibbled on by passing bugs or withering in the Wisconsin sun. So I'm going to admit something now that I didn't quite make up that story, this spiritual giant that comes to Camp Ramah and doesn't know what to do there, and finally decides, I'll do something with prayer, and actually does get some kids. I was one of those kids, and I don't remember why exactly. I'm nothing like Yael or Tzipi, but and that's what we did. We prayed for one row, and we totally ignored another row. And he was trying, the teacher was trying to get us to understand prayer. Not sure why, but I'm not sure how that worked. But I still remember it all these years later. And of course, the row that we did not pray for flourished. In the row that we prayed for, really prayed hard and harder and harder, getting up at midnight, ended up dying. And now, in the story, it's a crisis for the kids, because when the kids learn that prayer doesn't work, he didn't really set them up with a kind of theology. He's just trying to let's see what happens. And he had just this idea. He had this vague idea that, maybe I can teach them that prayer is not like a vending machine. You don't always get what you want in prayer. But he didn't really set it up with them. And he got, and they were extremely disappointed. But the one that was most disappointed and most upset was Yael. So I'll read you a little bit more of that now, and we'll come to the end of this chapter. He spotted Yael. This is after it's clear that their row died. He spotted Yael kneeling by herself, fingering a simple stalk from Rav Itzik. No ears, not yelling, just thoughtful contemplation. She gets it, Moshe thought, it's enough. I did it for her, but she didn't get it. 2 nights after the blow up in the field, just as the mosquitoes announced his bedtime, she pounded on his door. It seemed she had stopped breathing. Her face was beet red and damp. Her lips trembled, but nothing emerged. No protest, no cry, no ear. Gewalt, he said softly, and pulled her in by her arm. Breathe, precious one, he said, and somehow it was enough. She expelled air, then sucked it in, then collapsed in his arms, weeping. He patted her on the back of her tank top, careful to avoid the bare naked arms. Ah, sweet one, you care so much, the pain in your heart. That's what it means to enter God's throne room. That's our secret. You understand it now, but you already knew. My heroine, my strong one, you knew. No, 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 she said, pulling back, staring at him. Her brown-green eyes magnified by the tears, so they looked enormous, supercharged. I'm not strong. I failed. I saw what you were doing. I knew it wasn't about which row of beans did better. You told me. I read your article. Not about the outcome. That's what you teach. It's about entering God's palace, being with God. I knew that, but I so wanted those beans to live. I wouldn't even have cared if Itzik had lived too. Or even if Roitzik grew better beans, but all my beans died. It wasn't fair. I failed. It wasn't about the beans, it was me. I flunked. I can't pray. She fell back into his arms. Weeping over spiritual failure. Who was this child? A reincarnation of Rav Nachman? Nowadays, who mourned God's exile? Who grieved at the hiding of the face? No one, except for this blessing in his arm, this tzaddiket with the broken heart, broken home. You are my Rebbe, he whispered to her. Only a true rabbi teaches heartbreak. Sweet one, and you're teaching me so much light from the darkness. That's what you give me. It will come to you. The light will invigorate your soul. You'll be the truest friend, the wisest teacher, the most soulful lover. Gewalt, sweet friend. One day you'll see it. But not that day. He couldn't console her. She was inconsolable. He walked her back to her cabin, then detoured through the field to check on the plants. They were eaten, nothing left but a few stalks. What did you do to that girl? He was in the office of brother director. A cabin, not unlike his own, stained brown, walls made of wood, a metal picnic table, kitchenette, ancient sofa. Moshe preferred bare walls, but the director decorated his with Israeli flags, posters featuring sand, camels, and blue skies, bearded yeshiva boys in Jerusalem dancing, their faces turned toward heaven, soldiers weeping at the western wall, Israeli jet fighters flying over Auschwitz, campers in skimpy bathing suits cavorting in the lake, an advertisement for Camp Tikva. Sitting at the uncomfortable table, the director peered down at Moshe, looming over him like a Cossack, threatening a pogrom. The arms alone were tree trunks, but Moshe was particularly impressed with the huge barrel chest, the chest of a man who could hold his breath forever. Every limb on his body, his clenched fists, his coiled thighs, his bullet head, his sunburned face communicated conflict. Imagine wrestling this man, Moshe thought. Could be fun for maybe 3 minutes. Do? Knew I taught her some songs. She discussed with me this business with her family, her father. She davened and knew she accuses me of something. So what happened is that she freaked out and that she had to leave camp. Her father had to come and get her. So it was a major disaster. And they end up firing Moshe, the director ends up fired. So he wants to go see her. So he tells the director, Moshe shot to his feet. Not so easy for an out of shape yid, first thing in the morning. I need to go to her. Sit, she's gone. Gone? Where's there to go? He thought of the woods and lake. Her father picked her up this morning. He's taking her for a ride. Hopefully she'll come back. The father, buddy, yes, Mendel Gold. He's got his own problems, but I've got a camper weeping her heart out. Won't eat, won't get out of bed. What do you expect me to do? Then he fired Moshe. He gave him 24 hours to clear his shit out and hit the road. All right, just a little bit more. Moshe assumed as his 18-year-old Dotson struggled through the insanely green Wisconsin hills that his career as a Jewish educator, such as it was, had ended. Even Sippy's mother, he figured, would remove her patronage, since her own daughter would undoubtedly characterize herself as a victim of the bean plant scandal. He wondered if he should finally move to Israel, or maybe make a go of it in Poland, sell himself as the last real Eastern European Jew, travel the Jewish tourist circuit from Prague to Krakow to Budapest to Warsaw. But as was often the case when Moshe made predictions about his future, he was wrong. Far from destroying his livelihood, the beanstalks made him famous. The article he published on the experiment won several magazine awards. He turned it into a book and then a documentary film. Concert bookings quadrupled, then quadrupled again. Sippy's mother didn't abandon him after all, but instead recruited more millionaires, even billionaires. They clapped and danced and sweat and wept at his concerts. They took his business cards from his outstretched arms and sometimes actually called him for advice or with new gigs, a concert, a lecture, a corporate class, spiritual consulting. In between concerts and lectures and workshops in a kind of semi-sleep fugue state, he wrote serious scholarship on Jewish mysticism, and suddenly invitations came from serious universities, Case Western, Indiana, Northwestern. And lastly, of course, kicking and screaming, always resistant to mystical nonsense, the Hebrew Theological Institute, a faculty position. New donor friends insisted, particularly the billionaires from the Valley of Silicon. They adored him. And then with God's good grace, Sippy, of all people, became chancellor. Her first academic act was to offer him tenure and an endowed chair, a big shot scholar at the age of 65 with some money in the bank. That's what happened after brother director, Moshe honestly could never recall the holy Jew's actual name, fired him. What did you do to that girl, the wrestler had asked? And Moshe told him the story. But before the story, he answered the question. What did I do to her? I taught her how to pray. All right, so that's most of that chapter, and trying to get a sense of them meeting, what Moshe was like before he was famous, what Yael is like when she was a kid. She later becomes a rabbi, and like I said, there's a lot in there. I don't want to tell you because there's things about the plot that I don't want to give away, but somehow that story also stands on its own. Like I said, it was published as a short story. So any questions? And as I answer the question again, I'll try not to ruin the book, but I'm also happy to answer anything.
Sonia, we see you have a question. Feel free to
I do.
unmute.
Yeah,
Oh,
so,
sorry.
hi, Rabbi.
Hi.
Hi. So I'm on Peter's chapter, so I'm a little more than halfway through the book. And I was very curious about where that bean story came from. So I'm glad you talked about how that was your experience. Are there other things in the book other than the negative sexual, Me Too, all that, but other experiences in the book that come from your life?
Everything in the book comes from my life, but that doesn't mean that this stuff happened to me.
Right.
It means that, yeah, I mean, there are definitely some things that yeah, for sure. I could beat around the bush, but I'm not sure that they're that interesting, the stuff that's happened to me. I think, but there's a lot that, just getting a sense of what it's like to be in rabbinical school, what it's like to go to camp, what it's like to have a spiritual mentor, what it's like to have that kind of disappointment, in a spiritual mentor. So I've experienced all that. But you write what you know. So that's writing what I know. Yeah. It sounds like I'm, like I said, it sounds like maybe I'm hesitating or beating around the bush. I don't mind answering a specific, if you're curious about a specific incident, I'm happy to talk about it.
No, for me, it was just a more general where the ideas came from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it all, by the way, the characters also come from my life too. So I don't know if someone was going to ask, are any of the characters based on real people? And I'm not, you can ask that if you want, but one of my answers I'm going to telegraph right away is that they're all based on a real person. They're all based on me. Every character that I write in all of my books has something of me. And that's an obvious answer, right? Because I wrote the book. So in some ways there's something of me in every character. But for me, that's also true for every serious character in the book. There's something of me, something of my emotion, something of my character, something of my makeup, from Moshe to Yael.
I was glad to see there was no female president of Michigan.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Well, my next book, I'll make sure to put a former president of, yeah, Eric.
Yeah, Rabbi, thank you so much for writing the book. It brought back tons of memories for me. I attended or went to Joseph Eisner Camp for Living Judaism in the Berkshires about 60 years ago, and your Moshe was my Shlomo.
Yes.
And everything that's wrapped up with Shlomo Carba, came to light in my mind reading your book. And I just wanted to get your impressions, if we can go off, I guess, on a tangent from the book itself to Rabbi Berkdahl at Central Synagogue when the all his misdemeanors became known. She wouldn't sing or allow any of his music in her congregation for over a year. And whether this cancel culture type of thing, it should happen or does happen. With your experiences in the rabbinate and sexual abuse and et cetera.
Yeah. So what I tried to do in the book is really kind of elevate those questions. So people could talk about them. You mentioned Shlomo Carlebach, and it's silly for me not to admit that there's a lot of similarity between Shlomo Carlebach, who is a real person, and Moishe, who is a fictional character. And I'll talk about that a bit, then I'll kind of address your broader questions. But first of all, there's a lot that's different between Moishe and Shlomo Carlebach. Shlomo Carlebach actually never made it as big as Moishe makes it in the book until after he died. After he died, his fame kind of in his teachings exploded. And Shlomo Carlebach never would have been invited in a million years to teach at JTS, at Jewish Theological Seminary, or at any rabbinical school. One thing I'll say about Shlomo, because I knew him a little bit. I mean, he knew lots of people, but I wouldn't say he was a mentor of mine. I met him personally maybe 2 or 3 times. But I liked his music, and I bought cassettes. I liked his teaching. I still like his teaching. It was known in the Jewish world, some of the things that he did, but this was in the Me Too era. It was the 60s, 70s, 80s, and nobody did anything. No, people kind of whispered about it, but it didn't seem to affect his career. Maybe it did, sort of behind the scenes, and then, there's the big issue. So then he dies, and he becomes even more famous, and everybody's, for a while it was just Orthodox synagogues that use his melodies. Now everyone's doing his melodies, and there's Carlebach minions, and he's a tremendous force. And this is, in the years after he dies, and then even before that, there was an article in Lilith magazine, which brought out just how much sexual misbehavior there was, sexual bullying. Now, he wasn't a Harvey Weinstein, and that's why it's important. I'm a little uncomfortable even talking about it because, it's a novel, but it is based on sort of the Shlomo Carlebach story. And part of what I was trying to do in the book is to separate. Is it possible to make distinctions between like an Al Franken on the one hand and Harvey Weinstein on the other? And I tried to make Moishe, some more on the Al Franken side than that doesn't give anything away, by the way. So then, after things come out, and then we all get a little bit more woke. I mean that in a good way. We all become more sensitive to this issue. And the issue is, okay, so what do we do with Shlomo Carlebach now? And in some synagogues, some rabbis said, okay, we're not going to use his music anymore. And some synagogues, some rabbis don't, recognizing the misbehavior, but sort of uplifting the melodies and the teachings. And I don't have an answer. I think that's I don't have an answer right now. I actually have personal opinions, but they're not the answer. But what I don't think has happened is I don't think there's been a lot of sort of public conversation about Shlomo and a public reckoning with who he was and his influence on the Jewish world and the bad things that he did. And so part of what I was trying to do in the book is explore the Shlomo phenomena using a novel, using a story, using a fiction as a vehicle. It's very important to me to say, in Judaism, it's not just Shlomo Carlebach. There are many Shlomo Carlebach types. Some of them are imitators. Many of them imitate his bad behavior too. And I've known them, other people have known about them. And of course, it's not just Judaism. It goes back to what I started with, this connection between spiritual charisma and sexual behavior that it goes back to King David. I mean, it's not a new thing. It's not recent, and it's not just Jewish, not just religious either, but it happens in religion. In some ways, it creates more of a moral dilemma for religious leaders than with Harvey Weinstein. Because honestly, who looks to Harvey Weinstein for moral instruction? But many people did look and do look to Shlomo Carlebach or these Catholic priests, or your local yoga instructor who suddenly is busted for something. And so what I'm trying to do in the book is, all right, can you separate the teacher from the teachings from the teacher? Can a person still be your mentor after you've been tremendously let down? So that's and then so it gets to cancel culture too. And that's the thing. I mean, I think many people would like to cancel Shlomo Carlebach, but I don't think it's worked. I don't think he has been. And what I want to discuss is, should he be? So cancel culture was a big part of, although that phrase came sort of towards the end of when I was writing the book, but it's a theme of the book too. So I see Irv and Jackie. You're mute though, so you just have to unmute.
I'd like to first introduce that I worked at San Diego State to earn a creative writing degree, master's degree in creative writing. And so I learned some of the techniques, particularly writing short stories. I was never so ambitious as to do novels, but I wrote a number of short stories. And I know the elements, I've learned them. I'm sure you learned them. I think you spent time in Iowa at the Writers' Workshop years ago. So you prepared yourself. I identify from what you've read, rather good detail for images. It's something I'm tuned into, probably others are as well, but it's something I learned at San Diego State. And you have a very creative storyline, no doubt. And I suspect that you have periodic crises that get solved along the way, like every so often in a chapter. Maybe all chapters should end with a mini climax until you reach the final big climax. Maybe you want to talk about that intention.
Oh, that's interesting. First of all, yeah, thanks, and it's good to see you. I never was at Iowa, but I did. I don't think I've ever been to the state of Iowa before, but I did study creative writing at Northwestern. Northwestern, where I went undergraduate, that was my undergraduate major, was creative writing, and they had a pretty good program. And I've been writing creatively really my whole career, sort of as a sideline, and try even now to keep up with it. I do have this. I like it when chapters end on cliffhangers. So I think just about every writer writes what they like to read for the most part, and those are the kind of books I like to read. So I started writing mysteries. I joke around about this, but I had written a couple books before that. One was science fiction, and then another book. And I was talking to a friend of mine who was a filmmaker, and he said, "Yeah, I've made a lot of films, but I think I'd like to make a film that people will want to watch." And I thought, yeah, that's probably a good idea. I thought, yeah, you know what? I should probably write a book that people want to read. And I thought, yes, people like mysteries. I've always, always liked mysteries myself too. And then what do you do? So when you want to write a mystery, I'd already read a lot, but you just keep on. For me, you just have to just inhale mysteries, just keep reading more and more. And I did that. And I like the style. I like a style that has a narrative has narrative momentum all the way through. So this is what I try to do. Whether I succeed or not is up to you. But what I try to do is have narrative momentum go all the way through. In most chapters, not every chapter, but most chapter ending in a kind of cliffhanger where you want to read the next chapter. And so I certainly tried to do that in this book.
Rabbi Elisa Schechter.
Yeah.
So just switching around for a minute from what you're talking about. Moishe is definitely a storyteller. He's stories within stories. He creates stories when they're not really stories, but stories from Talmud he does, and Kabbalah, and he just stories that he just makes up. And
Right.
then the character of Yael, she's more of an intellectual.
Yeah.
And her spiritual life begins with the intellectual, as I see her.
Yeah.
So Moishe's stories are very disturbing to her, and the mystical. And of course, she goes on to become a very good rabbi and moves on to positions of power in the movement. But I just want to know this dichotomy between them. What was the message that you were trying to say about these 2 points coming to be rabbis from two very distinctive different starting points?
That's a really interesting insight. And I don't think that I had a message when I was creating those characters and writing, but I want to make a comment. First, this book, I wouldn't call it necessarily a sequel, but Yael's been in a previous book. Yael and Peter were in a previous book, and another scandal, which is alluded to in this book. But I don't think that I tried very hard that you don't have to have read the previous book. It's called Rabbis and Gangsters, to understand women and God. But Yael and Peter, and it takes place in this Las Vegas-like suburb. So I was happy to get a chance to try these characters out again, and give her more to do, and maybe I'll write about her again. All right. So the contrast between her and Moshe is really interesting, and that's why two things happen. One is that he drives her crazy. She loses it. I mean, she's emotionally on edge quite a bit, and she's bereft by the scandals that are exploding around her. And Moshe's story sometimes just seem like he's beating around the bush, that he's just not articulating to her directly what's going on. But his approach to the spiritual life is through stories. It's also through music. So it's through two things, music and stories. He also happens to be the character, a Talmid Chacham, so a wise student. But he gets his spiritual ideas across through stories and music. And for him, it's two types of stories. One, from the tradition, a Talmud story, a Hasidic story, and another that he just makes up. When he makes them up, he doesn't admit to making them up. He tries to sort of insert them right away as part of the canon of Jewish stories. And you get the sense that he's making them up as he goes along. And you're right. I mean, her spiritual approach is much more cerebral, intellectual. So if you take those two together, then that's me. So I think I think it's a lot of rabbis I know, but it's certainly me. And I started out as Yael. So through my first congregation, they had to put up with, the sort of hyper intellectual rabbi. I was just, always looking to try to unravel the Talmud passage. And then some of it I'm going to admit came from the influence of Shlomo Carlebach, but it was other people, other spiritual people I was reading. A lot of it actually was Heschel, Zalman. There's a few other people that I got to know over the years. And I became enamored with that side of spiritual consciousness without necessarily giving up the intellect. But that side of spiritual consciousness is storytelling and music, and how important those are. Those could be as important, maybe much more important, a spiritual tool, a spiritual weapon even, than the intellect. And so you take these two stories, these two characters, those are the main characters in the book, and you have me. That doesn't mean it's a perfect balance. It means it's sort of what I've tried to balance in my career. The later parts of my career, I was much more interested in storytelling and music than I was in kind of the intellectual naughtiness of theology. And I always tried to find a story to tell. And then I have this kind of fiction background where I'm already telling stories. What I did in my later years, let's say the last 10 years at Bethel, was really try to bring that storytelling impulse to the fore and make sure I was telling enough stories, because I think people just grabbed onto them. But also for me, it was more spiritually satisfying.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Jerome, do you have a question?
I do have a question. It's probably three parts to it. One, I'm very interested in what your writing regimen is. And then did you depart from that with this book, or did you stick with that regimen, hours per day or words per day? I'm curious about that. But so that's the first question. I guess there's only two parts. Second part is, write what you know. Right. And that's very comfortable because we come from a place of knowing and experience when we write that. What about the uncomfortable parts of this, the discomfort in writing? Because the topic is very challenging, and I don't really even know how to put my question to you, but do you go up to a point where you question whether to cross that line or not cross that line? So what's your regimen and what's your discomfort?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I can easily, well, I shouldn't say easily answer. I can answer both. So the regimen isn't very difficult. For this particular book, I had retired, so I needed something to do, and writing a book seemed like a good idea. And I had this idea. I had the idea in the back of my mind for a while. So when I'm writing, so the first thing I do when I write a novel, that's mostly what I've written. I think I've written 6 novels. So I always do a detailed outline of the story before I start, writing longhand. And I have a notebook. Generally, like for this book, the notebook had about 40 pages of just of detailed outline by chapter, what's going to happen each chapter. And then I know, and actually before I do that, I jot out the names of the characters. I change that a lot. And then, and kind of what the characters are like, who they are and what they're like. And then I do the outline. So I have the whole story outlined in the 40 pages before I start writing. And that makes the writing a lot easier. Because then, I'm, of course, you still have to do several drafts, but I'm just kind of filling in the storytelling that I'd done already. And then, yes, I write every day, several hours a day, and I have, like, it's not so much a word count, but like 5 pages is what I aim for a day. So if I can do 5 pages a day, that's pretty good. If you think about it, like this 365 years. I mean, that's, now, of course, I'm going to have to revise and throw out pages, and lots of stuff's not going to work. So I'm not going to come up with 1,500 pages in a, thank God for me and for the reader, but 5 pages a day, so, it's pretty good for me. 5 pages doesn't amount to 5 pages in prose. It's more like probably 4 pages in a published book. All right, so how I felt uncomfortable. Well, there's a lot in this. It's interesting you picked that up. There's a lot in this book that I felt, I was getting to the edge of a border that maybe I shouldn't cross. And I just kind of stayed on that edge. The main thing is the character Moishe. And because I was trying to simultaneously judge him, to understand that things that he did were really unforgivable. And at the same time, have us be sensitive to him. And in some ways, it's not so much likable, but it's to have him be sympathetic to the reader. And the reason I say that is that because that's how Yael felt about him. Yael's the main character, and so she was very upset with him, but she was sympathetic to him too, so I tried to make him, in other words, not a monster, but a human being. But I was afraid in humanizing him that I was going too easy on him. And by him, of course, I don't mean him because he's a fictional character, but people like him. That was tricky, to the very end. I was kind of playing around with him and the different letters he writes, and just I even write from his point of view in that one chapter, which is sort of just trying to get into his head. So it's getting to the head of and it's getting into the head of a person who's done some very bad things. That's a hard thing to do. The other challenge is writing from the point of view of a woman, a young woman rabbi. And I have the rabbi part of that down, but I'm not young and I'm not a woman. And I think that I was happy to take that challenge. I was worried whether I would be up to it, but of course that's up to the reader. But there's also issues nowadays with you hear talk in the world of writing and authors about can a non-Mexican write from the point of view of a Mexican? Can a non-African American write from the point of view of an African American? So can an older male rabbi write from the point of view of a younger female rabbi? Because there's a lot I'm not going to get, and I understand that. So, but I liked the character, and I wanted to inhabit her. And wanted the other book was also from her point of view. This actually much more so, because this has some first person narration from her point of view. So that was tricky for me. And the one thing I'll say about it, I'm kind of running out of time, but the one thing I'll say about it is that I feel like if writers aren't allowed to use their imagination, then fiction really dies. And part of using the imagination is putting yourself with authorial empathy into the shoes of people that are very much not like you. So there's many, many ways that Yael is not like me. I know her context, and I tried to know her heart, her soul. And that was kind of the exercise in the novel. And then it was my responsibility to kind of show that to other people, to get other people to see it too. But those are the two challenges. I'd say, writing from Yael's point of view and writing about Moishe from a semi-sympathetic point of view.
So Rabbi, if I could follow up on that. So
Sure.
you are not a female rabbi, but you are married to a female rabbi, right?
Right.
So did Susan help you sort of figure out the character of the female rabbi?
Well, she did by being a female rabbi. She didn't give me advice, but I mean, I didn't ask for advice either about it. She read it. It's funny you should mention that. Yes, my wife is, some of my best friends are female rabbis, including one that I married. And I tried very hard to make sure that the characters seemed very much nothing like Susan. Yeah, because I just didn't want people to jump to that conclusion. I didn't care if they thought, Moishe was Shlomo Graubart, that's fine. But I really didn't want them to think Yael was Susan. So I went out of my way to draw a completely different character. So if you see similarities, they're by accident.
I did not see Susan in her.
Yeah. An educated rabbi and Jew in our world today is going to encounter the challenges of being a female rabbi. Now, am I the best person to write about that? I don't know, but my imagination, sort of my fictional calling demands that I give it a try. So I felt like, it's not like I did a tremendous amount of research, but I know a lot of women rabbis. I'm aware of a lot of what they go through, and I try to put that into her story and into her character.
Rabbi, I think Irv still has one last question,
Okay.
and we do have a few more minutes. We can continue for a few.
Okay. So Irv, go ahead.
I'm reminded of my experience with Professor Harold Jaffe at San Diego State. Maybe some of you know him. He was my favorite mentor in my writing learning. And my predilection at first was to write stories that were personal experiences. And he took me aside one day and said, "You have got to write fiction. You have got to use your imagination to create things that you haven't personally experienced." And that was an eye-opener for me.
Yeah. So that's ultimately what I told myself, is that you're writing fiction, so that's an active imagination. So you rely on your imagination. Well, thank you for everybody, and thanks Beth Israel for hosting me. It's really been nice. The connection to Beth Israel has really been a sweet part of my retirement. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Well done.
Have a good night.
And I do want to remind everyone the book is available, and Robert just let us know Amazon has them back in stock. So please do check that out. And next time you see Rabbi Graubart, get an autograph in that front cover.